Paul Hudrick is our Sixers insider for 97.3 ESPN.com. There he is, jumping in to the Boardwalk Honda hotline and up on the video screen as we get you ready for All-Star Weekend. But there's so much to dive into with this Sixers team. By the way, last night we saw Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. I was off. I said I thought Embiid would be the first pick. He ended up being the fourth pick last night. I didn't realize that Durant was going to take Kyrie Irving first, which was kind of you can't really I didn't know the loyalty was so strong between the net guys, right?
Yeah, that's all that was. It's his guy. I mean, hey, that's why they both teamed up and decided to go to Brooklyn together. So, of course, they want to be on the same team for the All-Star game. So.
Now, I will say, when LeBron took Ben, that was like the biggest, Durant was like, oh, man, I wanted Ben Simmons. Like, that was the one guy. There was a couple, but playful, but it seemed that Durant was interested in Ben Simmons. So, Ben went with the second pick to LeBron of the reserve. So LeBron has Ben, and Embiid is on Durant's team. So that's where those guys went last night. I do want to get into the betting odds that start this second half. They're going to come out to start the second half, Paul, with Joel Embiid as the favorite to win the MVP in the league. And really, I mean, we've talked so much about Ben. You wrote Joel, you wrote this great piece that I implore everyone to go read about. We're running out of words to kind of describe him. But what I asked was, and this isn't a trolling question, if you never win a championship with this group, was it still worth ending up with Joel Embiid, to lose for a couple of years and you have Embiid, and maybe you don't win a championship, but I am at the point where he's almost more fun now than Allen Iverson.
And you know what, Mike? When you bring up Allen Iverson, that's what I think about when I think about the idea of when we talk about, was the process worth it? You think about the time after the Sixers traded Allen Iverson up until the time that they got Joel Embiid and for him to be playing at this level, there has not been a player, and there have been some good players. Andre Iguodala was here, Drew Holiday was here. There have been some good players, but no one. Think about that gap between Allen Iverson and Joel Embiid. There has been nobody like that in that entire time frame, and you might never have gotten that if you didn't do what you did. I understand, people don't like losing on purpose. I get it, but I think it was an ends to justify the means kind of thing, and we're seeing the fruits of that. Like, this guy is the favorite to be the MVP of the league, and for good reason. He absolutely should be, as they sit here right now. And then not just him, but yes, I know Brian Colangelo was the one who technically drafted Ben Simmons, but let's be realistic. The strategy that was in place is how Ben Simmons arrived here. So to have those two guys in place, that is why, to me, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, but when we talk about all these trade scenarios, why I'm not afraid to give up young assets and young players and trade draft picks, because I know that those two are here for the long haul, and they are all-stars. They are perennial all-stars. And like I said, Joel Embiid is an MVP caliber player. We have not seen that since Allen Iverson. So that, to me, yes, makes it worth it.
Well, okay. So everybody seems to have their own definition of what and it's not like, hey, tell me what the process is, but a lot of people feel like if you don't win a championship, that it was a failed decision. I've never been in that camp. You can't guarantee a championship. What it was is, to me, it was a business decision by the franchise. That organization had zero enthusiasm behind it. Nobody cared. And now Sixers Twitter is a cesspool because you care so much, and you only care for one reason, because you believe that they can win. And the Sixers organization, of course, had a say. Well, this is about winning multiple championships. Of course, that's what they want. But the end result was that business decision was to make business boom again, and it was a grand slam home run. That building is electric. It's sold out every night. And now they have the player that they lost for. You have to have an MVP in this league to win a championship. And they now have that. To me, it was maybe one of the greatest organizational decisions that they've ever made.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree, Mike. It really is, because again, you look at the what was going on before that, when the Doug Collins era, and just the mediocrity. Again, there were good players on that team, but that team was never good. That you can't tell me, even when they were, there was that they beat the Bulls in the first round that one year because Rose, Derrick Rose's knee blew up, and then they go to the second round. They take the remnants of that Celtics team to 7 games. You're going to tell me that was even remotely as exciting as what you felt with this team over the last couple of years? Like, no, this team gives you a chance. Again, those two players, if you have Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, you have a chance every year to compete and to possibly compete at a high level. Last year was obviously a huge disappointment, but other than that, 2 years ago, they made it to the second round to Game 7, a couple bounces away from maybe going to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then 3 years ago, when they lost to Boston, at the beginning of the year, if I had told you with a rookie Ben Simmons and a second-year Joel Embiid that they were going to get to where they got, you would have gladly taken that. So I just think when you put it all, when you contextualize the whole events that transpired because of the process, because of that catalyst and what they did to get here, yes, it was worth it. The strategy made sense. You have two transcendent, like, all-star players. You haven't had this since the 80s. You haven't had multiple all-stars for multiple years since Dr. J and Moses Malone.
Think about how much they sucked out of having Iverson. Really, with Iverson, they had one special season. Other than that, the team was never any good. I mean, they were a first-round exit almost every single year, but you just kept paying to go back to see Iverson. And that was it. You paid to see Iverson. When Iverson left, the team wasn't any good after 01. They weren't any good before 01. They were good for 1 year. So anything they tried to do from pre-Iverson to post going to the finals, it did not work. But what worked was we have Iverson, and people will come and see him. Heck, they let him go, and they brought him back, and he played like 10 games, and those games sold out because of Iverson. The organization understood we need that level of player. And look, I will be the first to admit, it wasn't perfect. They made a lot of mistakes. Now, some of those mistakes had to do with Hinkie was here, then he was replaced. You brought Colangelo in. He gets booted. You bring Brett Brown in as the GM. He made a couple of bonehead decisions as the GM. Then you bring in Elton Brand. You had 4 different visions for how to build a team that had – it was like Iverson, though. They could never figure out what to do around Iverson, and I only hope that they don't have that same problem around these two guys, that you have these two guys here and that they never know they never had the right piece around Iverson, and I don't know that they have the right two pieces or the right pieces around these two guys, but I hope it's not a 10-year dog chasing his tail trying to find the right two pieces.
Well, you look at what Daryl Morey did. He just went back. Well, a couple of things he did. He consulted with those players and said, like, what can we do to improve? And then he looked back on, well, this was the best you guys have ever played together, and you were surrounded by shooting. So let's go ahead and do that again. And you're seeing the results of that in the first half of the season. Right now, those two, like, when we look at it, when you look at their careers and them playing together, I can't remember a stretch with those two on the floor together where they have both been playing this well. And that's huge. Them learning kind of, because, Mike, it wasn't that long ago that the big question was, oh man, can these guys even play together?
Yeah.
We like, so many people were calling to break them up last year. Now you wouldn't even dream of it with the state of the team right now. Now, if you suggested that, you'd be crazy. But listen, I thought it was crazy a year ago, but there were plenty of people who were behind that who said, oh no, you have to either ride with Ben Simmons or you have to ride with Joel Embiid. You can't make it work with both. Now you're seeing, you know what? I think you can make it work with both. Now, I think there's going to be other pieces that need to be involved, but this is a team that has the best record in the Eastern Conference for a reason. They are a really good basketball team. There are better fitting pieces around them this year than there were at any point last year. You could maybe even argue 2 years ago, just from a pure fit standpoint. And I think that's what Daryl Morey has done. He has recognized, okay, these two guys are my guys. What do I need to do to bring out the most in them? And the answer really is shooting. And now I think you need a guy, maybe a ball handler might be the other option now. But I think that you have the right guy in charge. You have a guy who's smart, who's going to identify that, who's going to keep that has been his vision all along since he arrived. It has been, I have 2 all-stars. My goal is to do everything I can to maximize their talents and to get the most out of them and to maximize my roster.
Yeah, the irony of all this, like, I would love to see, people want to see the 30 for 30 on the process. I want to see the 30 for 30 on what Hinkie would have done in the year that Colangelo was in charge, what he would have done in that draft with Fultz. That we'll never know. That whole thing threw this thing into a whole loop. But I will say the irony here is that Hinkie's former boss is now the guy who gets to clean up the mess that happened post Hinkie. Pretty funny. So with that, it looks like the trade names are going to start coming up. I know it. PJ Tucker's name is starting to come up. I don't know that does much for you. Doesn't do much for me. I think Morey is going to be attached because, of course, he was in Houston, and I feel like that is the reason there. Does that do anything for you?
It does a little bit. Listen, I've been talking to people on Twitter about it all day. It's not. I don't look at it as, oh man, you get PJ Tucker, now you're a finals favorite. No, of course not. That's ridiculous. But I think he's having a bad year, but it's that. Name me a guy on that Rockets team other than Christian Wood that is having a good year. They're terrible. They're just not a good team. They're ill-fitting and it just doesn't work. And Tucker doesn't want to be there. He hasn't wanted to be there from the beginning. He's not happy with his contract. He wanted to be traded along with James Harden. He doesn't want to be there. So I would say throw out what if you've seen him this year, throw that out. What we've seen in the past and what we've seen him be able to do in the playoffs is 1, make a corner 3, and 2, be very versatile and tough defensively. So bringing a guy like that in who can, I would say maybe not 1 through 5, but 2 through 5 can guard. That's a big deal. And has done it at a high level, has done it in the playoffs. Everyone thinks back to that year, that Rockets team took Golden State to Game 7 in the Western Conference Finals. PJ Tucker was a huge part of why that happened. He just, again, his ability to guard multiple positions and to do it tough and to be physical and just that bulldog mentality. He's got that in a big way. And I think if he winds up here, leaving Houston, being reunited with Daryl Morey on a team that's as good as this, that's, trying to win a title, I think that rejuvenates him in a big way.
Yeah.
And I think he could be a good bench piece. Again, that's, to me, 1, he's not the savior. You're going to need, and you're going to need more. He's not going to be the only move if that's one move.
Fair enough. And I guess what I'm saying is I'm not giving up anything of value.
Yeah, a second-round pick would be the ultimate thing.
Yeah, I'm not.
Trade
again,
exception, second-round pick.
I'm not. If someone's saying, "Well, if you want Tucker, you need to give me Thibault," then I'm like, no.
No, yeah, that would be absurd because Thibault is to me a rotation player right now. So I'm certainly not giving up a rotation player or a Tyrese Maxey for him because that's too much value there.
Bjelica, did he do anything for you?
A little bit as a stretch 5, kind of like when we talked about Muscala the other day, the idea that one trade that was proposed where they would get Lou Williams and Muscala. Bjelica fits that same kind of mold where he could play the 5, like a small ball 5, and he could play the stretch 4. Again, another guy that I don't think you can look at this year's performance and use that as a barometer because 1, he's been in and out of the rotation all season long, and 2, that Kings team is a mess. So look at his past performances where he was around 40% from 3. That's more the player you would be looking at. He'd be good for situations where, Dwight Howard isn't in. And we've seen when Dwight Howard has a good matchup, he can be impactful. But when he has a bad matchup, it can get ugly. So, when you go up against a Chris Boucher, to have a guy like Bjelica that you can turn to and give you some stretch 5 minutes, I think it would be good. I don't think it's a huge upgrade. My guess would be, I don't know this. I don't have any inside knowledge of it. My guess would be, I would think Doc Rivers would prefer to stick with Mike Scott and try to let Mike Scott earn his way into that role as opposed to getting a Bjelica, but we'll see how that plays out.
All right, Brooklyn is believed to be the leaders to sign Blake Griffin. What does that do for Brooklyn and this Eastern Conference race?
On its face, nothing as of right now because I just don't know what Blake Griffin is, what he's going to be. If you're Brooklyn, it makes sense because you need some depth. You could use a bench option like him, and he's going to sign for the minimum. So kind of why not? Because they could really use that depth. But I just don't know what he is. The games we've seen this year, he's been bad. He just looks slow, just no explosion whatsoever. So I don't know where that knee is. He had knee surgery, obviously, that cut his season, a couple of years ago short. So I don't know where he is physically. If he can get back, he's never going to be that guy again, that high flying Lob City Blake Griffin. But if he can be Blake Griffin from a couple years ago, where he showed that he can stretch his game out a little bit, hit some threes, can still maybe score in the post a little bit. He has improved as a playmaker and a passer. So I don't think he's got some value. I just don't know how much. For the Sixers, I don't think it would have made sense because you would have had to dump somebody on your roster, which I don't know that there's anybody worth eating that cap hit for. But for Brooklyn, yeah, he makes a ton of sense on a minimum deal.
All right. I'll ask you this question that just came in on the text board here. It says, Mike, can you or someone please tell me how the Sixers get past the Nets when nobody on the Sixers starting lineup can score in the playoffs because Joel and Durant will be a wash. As far as scoring, the rest of the team can't score with Harden and Kyrie. So do the Sixers, as constructed, have enough firepower?
My initial instinct is no, that I still think they do need another piece. But with that said, I don't think the Tobias Harris that you saw last year in the playoffs, I mean, like, this isn't even the same guy. I mean, he looks like a completely different player this season. So you would hope that he would be better than he was in the playoffs last year. Listen, when they played Brooklyn in that first round a couple of years ago, Tobias Harris was actually really good in that series, if you recall, in that first round. Now, he obviously wasn't as good in that Toronto series. He was very up and down, but that was his first postseason run. Last year, he was bad. I mean, there's no other way to say it. He wasn't very good, but I don't think he was good at all last season, at least not to the level he has been this season. He's been monumentally better. And then also Ben Simmons, I think, is learning how to score in the half court. And I think he's become such a better scorer than he was. He didn't even get to play in the playoffs last year, but 2 years ago, what you saw, I think he is light years away from where he was in that Toronto series when they played. So I think that's where you're going to get some more scoring. But do I think they could use more? Yes, I do. I think they could use another playmaker. They could use another guy that could create off the dribble. Absolutely. I think that is, beyond a stretch four or PJ Tucker type, that is the guy I think they need the most, a shot creator and a shot maker.
Yeah, and I would also tell that guy and contend, if you can get another defensive player, I would take my chances with what I have and just lock down defensively. I talked about this yesterday. Those Golden State teams that won titles were great offensively, but people forget Klay Thompson and Draymond were great defensive players that the Nets don't have. They didn't have to outscore everybody because they could get stops. Can the Nets get stops in close games? I don't know.
Yeah, that backcourt, Kyrie and Harden, that's a liability defensively. In fact, I mean, James Harden, it's at this point is probably a little exaggerated, his defense.
Durant's a pretty good defensive player. Durant's a good defender, by the way.
Durant is, absolutely, because of his length and when he's engaged, he's actually a very good defender.
Yep.
So I think that's the guy in their starting five that you can't. But and even Joe Harris is fine, he's okay at best, as he's a pretty good team defender. But DeAndre Jordan isn't the guy. Again, another guy. He's not the Lob City DeAndre Jordan. He is not that guy anymore.
Well, you just brought up Joe Harris. Man, I could talk about this series. I can't wait to see if this series actually goes.
I know.
But Joe Harris is the kind of guy in a playoff series that teams just take out. They have great regular seasons. Right. They have great but guys who are one-dimensional shooters, you watch film on them one night on Tuesday night in February, and you're like, okay, whatever. You watch that guy in the playoffs, he's not getting a look. So one of their big weapons, their secondary weapon, you take that guy out in playoff series. So when you have a guy like Harris that you depend on, you put that guy in a playoff series, and he gets locked down, and that kind of negates him. So I don't know. I think it's going to be such a fun matchup. Hopefully we get to see it. And who knows? The Bucks might say, hey, don't forget about us. I think Miami could be a factor in the second half. I don't know. Does Boston have another run on them? They're probably going to make a deal. So this Eastern Conference, this second half, and we talked about it, that Sixers schedule is not kind.
No, it is not kind. That road trip is brutal. I think it's six home, road games in a row. Then they come home for a back-to-back, and then they're right back out on the West Coast. It's brutal. And then they play a back-to-back on the road in Milwaukee. There's just some brutal stretches there. And that's why, to me, you have to make moves, because I don't think you could be content where you are. You can't be complacent at that one seed, because Brooklyn's coming for you. As you mentioned, the Heat, they're going to be better in the second half. They're going to get healthy. Boston's going to make a move or two. You would
Yeah.
think they're probably going to get a more respectable big than what they have now. And then, of course, Milwaukee, like you said, Milwaukee, you can't sleep on Milwaukee. They had a bad stretch recently, but that was mostly without Drew Holiday. So you throw him back in the mix. And again, all these teams are going to look to improve their rosters. They're going to be in on guys like PJ Tucker. They're going to be in on guys like, maybe not a Kyle Lowry, but they're going to be in on some very good players. So it's not a time to get complacent. They're going to have to make a move or two to strengthen the team and also just lengthen the depth of the roster and match up better. I think that's the biggest thing for me is when the playoffs start, I want Doc Rivers to be like, okay, I have this piece if this happens. I have this piece if that happens. I just want him to have options. So if things don't work out, you can turn to different types of players.
Right. You get a guy like Bjelica. One series, maybe Howard's the better matchup. The next series, maybe he's not the right guy, and now you have a second option that's a better fit for a different team. I trust Morey that he's thinking about the things that we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And this is what Daryl Morey does. I mean, look at it. Kind of goes back to what we started talking about when we talked about building around Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. What did Daryl Morey do in Houston?
Yep.
His focus was all about how do I do this best to suit James Harden. Ultimately, it didn't work out. They didn't win a title, but that was always his approach. And it was the right approach because he had a star player. He had one of the greatest offensive players in NBA history. So everything he did, he thought, what is the best to complement James Harden? How can I do that best? And it evolved. As the game evolved, it evolved too. Like when he got Dwight Howard in there, then he realized, all right, well, the game's kind of going away from guys like Dwight Howard. So let me get a little bit, let me get another ball handler here in Chris Paul. I'm like, he was always kind of thinking, how can I make this better? How can I match up better? How can I best utilize the players that I already have and surround them with the best possible talent? And then Doc Rivers, what can I do to give Doc Rivers the guys that fit his style of play? And I think that's what makes him so great, and that he's not afraid to take chances, and that he's going to look at every possible option to do that. I think that's what makes Daryl Morey such a great executive, and I think that's why the Sixers are extraordinarily lucky to have him.
He's Paul Hudrick, at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. He's the host of the Coming In for a Landing podcast. And check out all his Sixers coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. He's back on Monday. We'll look back at the All-Star weekend, the second half. Great storylines. Paul, have a good weekend, man.
You as well, Mike. Take care, man.
All right. He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Always great to catch up with Paul and good conversation